All right, friends, welcome back. It is Thursday. It's week 2, day 4, reading through the Bible in a year. We are in Genesis chapter 41 through 43. And man, is there a lot that we could talk about in these 3 chapters. The amount of reading, how are you guys finding the amount of reading if you're following along here? The amount of reading to me is good. I don't think it's too much, but again, opinions will vary, but it's too much to talk about in any kind of comprehensive way. I'm just thinking about like how much I could say about one part of one chapter here. So what, again, think about as you reflect back on the reading yourself. What are the things that kind of stand out to you? What what it's really in your mind. What are you thinking about? What are you processing as you've read the passage? There's a bunch of stuff for me, and I'm trying to think about some of the things that maybe I haven't thought about as much in the past, and of course, some things that are the kind of the main parts of the story. So we're right in the midst of, in chapter 41, we're right in the midst of Joseph's story itself. But it's actually interesting with how fast. So chapters 39, 40, 41 are just kind of Joseph in Egypt with Egyptian people. But in chapter 42, his brothers come back in, and that's what the story is really primarily about. For a long time in the rest of the story, which takes us back to this idea that in chapter 37, we saw verse 2, this is the account of Jacob's family line. So I want to provide a little bit of correction because it's a bit of correction for me kind of in my own thinking. I think we tend to sometimes think Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, right? That's kind of the family line. But that's not it. That's not the story. It's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Jacob's children. And that's what actually the text there says that it's about. And even though we have these few chapters that really focus on Joseph, Joseph's story is almost a vehicle that takes us forward in this story, in this reconciliation between what's broken. Right, we see throughout the Genesis story brokenness between siblings, between a lot of different relationships, and then sometimes not restoration, like the case of Cain and Abel. Sometimes kind of limited restoration, which is in a lot of the other cases. Right, we see Jacob and Esau. And their particular circumstance, maybe a little bit less so. Maybe it's growing a bit. That's interesting to think about. Cain and Abel, not great. Isaac and Ishmael, maybe not as bad, right? Jacob and Esau, still some stuff there, but there's some reconciliation there we looked at. Joseph and his brothers, what's that going to look like? So anyway, Genesis tells us this is the story of Jacob's kids. It's not the story of Joseph. So God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who becomes Israel, who becomes this whole people, not Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So just want to point that out. I'm not sure if you thought that way, sort of, or not. Again, feel free to jump in, questions, comments, etc., as we're kind of walking along here. So we didn't talk about yesterday the 2 chapters really up until this, where Joseph's, of course, sold by his brothers, right, into the slavery. And he goes down to Egypt, Potiphar's house, kind of that doesn't have it bad there, except for Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him, doesn't work out. She accuses him. He's in jail. Dreams come back into the play, right? They saw dreams back when he was shepherding the flocks back in Canaan. Now he's able to interpret dreams for the cupbearer and the baker. One is killed. The other is restored back to their position, but he forgets about Joseph. Joseph says, hey, just remember me when you get out of here, put in a good word for me, but he did not. Verse 23 of chapter 40, The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Remembering and forgetting is an interesting thing in the biblical story. Whether or not it's like completely, I can't remember even meeting him. It's probably not likely, but it's not actionable. He didn't remember to do what he said he was going to do. He didn't act on it. He didn't do it. Instead, he didn't do it, or rather, he forgot. So the language of remembering and forgetting are used for God in other places. That's why it's important, I think, that we kind of check this a little bit. He remembered him eventually. Maybe it's more of God's timing. Yeah, he does in the next verse, and that's where we're going. Remember him. I'm reading a comment here. If you guys can't see the comments, you're not aware of what's going on there. So yeah, maybe it's God's timing. Joseph probably thought it was bad timing, but hey, don't we oftentimes think God's timing, whatever that means, is not good timing, right? Because how long? 2 years, right? In our reading today, the very beginning, chapter 41. When 2 full years had passed, the cupbearer didn't even remember all on his own. Something happened that reminded him about Joseph, and we see in the reading, right? He feels pretty. Seems like he feels pretty bad about it. So down in verse 9 of chapter 41, the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I'm reminded of my shortcomings." So it took the dream that Pharaoh had, that Joseph's going to interpret for him. Hey, I'm reminded of my shortcomings because, and he tells the story about this guy. This verse 12, a young Hebrew is there with us, and we told him his dreams, and he interpreted it. And it turned out exactly like what he said it would. So Pharaoh's interested. He sends for Joseph, and he's quickly brought from the dungeon. Good word there. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, "Hey, I got a dream. No one can interpret it. I heard you can interpret." This is interesting in verse 16. "I cannot do it," Joseph replied to Pharaoh, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." This reminds us a little bit of something that's going to come later, right? I think Daniel, a lot of similarities here with Daniel and his experience. So Joseph, in my mind here, is kind of gambling on something in a way, because if it happens, if he's able to do it, God gets the glory for making it happen, right? Which is going to increase God's esteem in Pharaoh's eyes. Of course, Pharaoh didn't worship God, or certainly not exclusively. Many gods would have worshipped. But if Joseph can interpret it, then it makes him and God look bad. So he's got a lot of faith, confidence. I don't know what here. So Pharaoh tells him the dream about the 7 cows and the 7 cows. And the grain stalks. Interesting, these pairs of dreams that seem to be going on here in the story. Joseph says to Pharaoh, I'm in verse 25 now, chapter 41. The dreams are the same. God, listen again here. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Okay, so this is this is a little subversive, more than we might think on the page. In the ancient world, oftentimes people would associate gods with countries or local places. Sometimes you would see the god of these people or the god of those people. And so maybe, say the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, but they wouldn't necessarily be talking the way that we talk about the kind of all-encompassing God, monotheism. There's only one God. They would think of the God of this or the God of that, and there's different gods with different maybe powers and abilities. And so Joseph is making a claim about God, his God, our God, Yahweh's ability to not only interpret these dreams, but that what happens in Egypt is that God is sovereign over that in some way, right? Because look at what he what I was saying here, verse 25. Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh were the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Okay. And so the two things of 7 cows is going to be the grain is going to be 7 years of plenty, and then 7 years of famine, right? And there'd be no way to predict this unless it was revealed. They couldn't assume that. And more likely, right, if there's year after year after year after year, 7 years of overabundance of plenty, you would think, wow, there's so much year after year after year. I'm going to spend more, eat more, give more, whatever. I'm not going to save because there's so much every year. I don't need to save anything. But because of this warning, they were able to do this thing where Joseph has this plan where they're going to save up a fifth, 20% of these harvests and put them in stores over these 7 years, such that when the years of famine come, they're prepared for that. So this plan, verse 37, seemed good to Pharaoh, all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God, or the gods?" You'll see a footnote there. So again, don't be careful in these things that we don't make conversions happen when they're not really happening. So Pharaoh likely he's not saying, "Hey, Joseph, your God's not real, my God's real." He probably thinks all these gods are real. And maybe, again, God, Joseph's God, the one God ultimately. Pharaoh's not saying, "Okay, now my gods are a load of crap, I'm going to worship this one God instead." But Yahweh God is rising in esteem because of this situation. That's kind of how it worked in the ancient world. So just be careful with not overreading some of these things. And yet, when people open their hearts up to God, we also don't want to discount that at the same time. So some interesting things there. So verse 41, Joseph's in charge. Here I put in charge of the whole land. Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger, puts robes of linen, the gold chain around his neck. He rides in a chariot. He's second in command. And we see that kind of being the pattern with Joseph, right? Wherever he does, whatever situation he's in, that's not the place he would want to be. And yet God blesses him in the moment. God blesses him as a prisoner in Potiphar's house. God blesses him even in jail for all those years. God blesses him in this situation, still in Egypt, away from his family. But he's faithful. It seems like he's growing up, maturing here, and he's being blessed here. So interestingly, verse 45, Pharaoh gave Joseph a new name, and he gave him Asenath. Don't know how to pronounce that exactly. Daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, to be his wife. So Pharaoh gives Joseph, I don't know that he has a choice. Like, this isn't like, hey, they fell in love necessarily. It's sort of, most marriages actually in the ancient world were arranged marriages. Okay, so some differences there. But this woman is a pagan priestess. Okay, she's priest of another god. So that must have led to some interesting conversations with Joseph and her along the way. We're not told any sort of detail except for that they have two kids together. So Joseph's kids, who are the two half tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim, that's down in verse 51 and 52. His kids are half Egyptian. Okay, so isn't that fun? Again, did you look for those? I asked you to think about looking at with Judah. We're going to let Judah in a minute. Judah and Tamar. This kind of messy situation is part of Jesus's family line. This situation now is part of God's people's family line. They become tribes, part of the tribes of Israel through this odd situation, if you will. Really interesting stuff. So Joseph is 30 by this point. That's back in verse 46 of chapter 41. Drink a coffee here. Joseph's 30. Do you remember how old he was at the beginning of the story? When he's heard the sheep and having the dreams? 17. So, right, 13 years have passed since then. So, time's marching on. And of course, these two series of 7 years and 7 years is going to be another 14 years that's going to elapse. So there's a lot of time period that's going on here. He's in jail for 2 years. So you think, your troubles last a while. Maybe we're a little short-sighted in how we get kind of eager in this. So what do we got here? Powerful dependence on Joseph's faith in God, courageous. Yeah, I think so. I think Joseph really is putting himself out there. That was probably there for a while, back to what I was talking about, with kind of putting God involved with interpreting the dreams and having power over them and that kind of stuff. So the 7 years of abundance happen quickly in the narrative. There's not much detail about that. And we're still in 41, verse 53, the years of abundance, 7 years of abundance came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. So this is interesting. Were they trusting Joseph the whole way through those 7 years, or saying, I wonder if this is going to be true or not? We're not told. They seemed to have faith in him. And of course they had more than they needed. So why not believe him? And they had stuff put aside, whether they needed it or not. Turns out, of course, that they did need it. There was a famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt, there was food. So when all of Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. And then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, go to Joseph and do what Joseph tells you. So Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain. This is interesting. We'll talk more about this tomorrow, I think. Tomorrow, the next day. Joseph is not just helping them out here. They're able to eat at the end of the day, but he's selling them the grain. So this is an interesting government help. But hey, they're not starving. So it's good as far as Pharaoh's concerned, especially because he's got plenty of food and he's making money, kind of deal. So chapter 42, we made it through one chapter in 17 minutes. That's pretty bad, pretty terrible for me, time-wise. Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt. So he said to his sons, listen to this. Isn't this fun? Why do you keep looking at each other? He continued, I have heard that there's grain in Egypt. So there's nothing growing, and they're just kind of sitting around there, maybe complaining about it or sitting around. And Jacob says, why do you guys just sit here looking at each other? I've heard that there's grain down in Egypt. Go there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die. How's that for an idea? And this is a substantial trek, so it's not right around the corner. So then 10 of Joseph's brothers. So this is where, remember, this story is not just about Joseph. The story is about Jacob's kids. And here they are. Now they're back in the story. So the Joseph kind of only deal is mostly now done. And we have all the children coming back into the story in this situation. The 10 of Joseph's brothers went down grain to Egypt. So there's 12, right? Why is there 10? Joseph's not there. Jacob thinks he's dead. He's already, of course, down in Egypt. And then he did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother. Remember, Rachel was his favorite wife, makes no qualms about it. And Joseph and Benjamin, her kids, are his favorites. Joseph's gone. Now Benjamin, he's the youngest. He's born to him in his old age. He's the son of his favorite wife. So Jacob's like, Benny's staying behind here. We're not sending Benjamin down the others because he was afraid that harm might come to him. Joseph's the governor. He sold all the grain. So Joseph's brothers arrived. They bow down to him. They're from Canaan, come to buy food. Verse 8, chapter 42, verse 8. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. So Joseph knows it's them. They don't know it's him. That's, of course, big for the story in the next couple of chapters. And yet Joseph. So here's one thing I want to say, because this is something that I realized I was a lot off on this myself. We talk a lot about, tomorrow we'll look at this in the text, about Joseph's forgiveness of his brothers, right? You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Don't worry about it. It's okay. It's all good. That comes It's very important, but it comes after some other stuff. And Joseph doesn't exactly make it easy for them. He doesn't. Sometimes if we compress the story, we sort of think that's when this happened, right? They come and they don't recognize him. And then he says, oh, it's me, brothers. Don't worry about it. God put me here for a reason. There's stuff that happens in between there. And it's kind of dramatic. And Joseph plays some games with them along the way to that. So, process that as you will. Feel free to share your own thoughts and questions and stuff, etc. So he has this interaction exchange with them. He accuses them of being spies, right? He's having fun with them. He's saying whatever. So look at this, again, to pause on the, hey guys, don't worry about what you did to me. Verse 17. And he put them all in custody for 3 days. So they're in jail. All 10 of them, right, are in jail for 3 days rather. He says, hey, let one of your brothers stay here while the other of you guys go back and take grain to your starving households. But you must bring back your youngest brother to me. Okay, that's some of the tension in this part of the story. But look at this. Verse 21, chapter 42, verse 21. They, the brothers, said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come on us. This is 13 plus the 7, right? It's 20 some odd years later, 20 something years after they do this, and things go wrong here, and they have this guilty conscience, right? God asks Cain about his brother, am I my brother's keeper? Cain says, right back in Genesis 3 or 4. The answer is supposed to be yes. Like, we are supposed to be our brother's keeper. They failed at that, of course. And when things go wrong, like sometimes in our lives, when things go wrong, we think, oh crap, this thing that I did, this thing that whatever, it was kind of coming back to bite me. Reuben jumps in, verse 22. Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. And look at this, verse 23. They did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. Okay, so the language they don't speak in Egypt. So even though Joseph can speak their language, they don't know it. He's speaking to them in Egyptian or whatever the language they're speaking in there, using an interpreter. So they don't know. Sometimes, like, people do this, they're speaking in their language, and you think Joseph can't hear, but Joseph, of course, can hear. Look at this, verse 24. He turned away from them and began to weep. We're going to see a lot of emotion from Joseph tomorrow and some today. But he came back and spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Okay? So he wasn't just lovingly escorted out as he's, handcuffed, so to speak. It's anachronistic, but tied up and whatever right before. So the image in their mind is their brother called off to jail as they go forth. All right, so there's more going on here with the silver and that kind of stuff. But again, time. So they're back. They report to Jacob. Verse 37, chapter 42, Reuben said to his father, you may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you, and trust him to my care. This is Benjamin, and I will bring him back, right? So the only way they can get Simeon back is if they do what Joseph said and bring their younger brother Benjamin back, but Jacob's not going to want to let go of Benjamin because Benjamin, he loves him. I settled that already, okay? Jacob says, verse 38, My son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead, Joseph, right? So he thinks. And he is the only one left. That must have made him feel great, right? He's on, Jacob. If harm comes to him on my journey you are taking, that will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow. So Jacob says no. Chapter 43, last chapter today. Now the famine was still severe in the land, and when they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, go back and buy a little more food. So they had enough grain to buy themselves some time here, but they ran out. Verse 3, Judah. Okay, let's talk about, for the rest of this, we're talking about Judah. Now, the chapter yesterday that we didn't look at because I talked so stinking long is chapter 38, Judah and Tamar. That's the one I mentioned, the turn of the genealogies to sort of find. So it seems like an interruption in the story. Joseph's dream start in chapter 37, and then this chapter 38 is this thing with Judah. But remember, it's not the story of Joseph. It's the story of Jacob's sons, Jacob's family. So it's Judah's in there. And Judah, if you recall from that reading, did not act honorably. He's not the one that looks so good, and he admits it. Again, I'm not going to recount that whole story. But what we're going to see here today is character development for Judah. And guys, I've not paid enough attention to this before. Again, I think Joseph. Judah's a big part of this. And Judah's important because Judah's family line, I mentioned the genealogies yesterday, is going to be, we're going to track through Ruth as well, through Boaz, but it's going to be David, and it's going to be, guess what? Jesus. So Judah's family line is very important in the biblical narrative, but Judah here steps up. So Joseph says, go back, I'm in chapter 43, in this last chapter, verse 3, but Judah said to him, the man warned us solemnly. This is Joseph. They don't know it's Joseph, of course. You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother, this is Benjamin, along with us, we will go down and buy food for you. But if you do not send him, we will not go down because this man told us we not see. So Judah is kind of stepping up even to daddy, Jacob. Is he honoring? I think he's still honoring his father, but I think Judah is stepping up here and showing leadership, showing maturity, and he puts himself on the line here, as we'll see in a second. Israel asks, why did you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had another brother? Why did you keep this information to yourself? You guys ruined it by doing that. They replied, the man questioned us closely about ourselves and our family. Is your father still living? Do you have another brother? We simply answered his questions. Now, how would we know that he would say, hey, bring your brother down here, right? Fair enough. I think they have a good point there. But look at this, verse 8. Then Judah said to Israel, his father, or Jacob, Israel, same thing. To Israel, his father, send the boy along with me, and we will go at once so that we and you and our children may live and not die. Here's the stakes, right? You want to protect Benjamin. Hey, we're all going to die of hunger if we don't do this. So, okay, Dad, this is the deal. We got to do it. I myself, first time, I myself will guarantee his safety, and you can hold me personally responsible for him. So he's not. This is really important in the whole biblical story. Remember Genesis chapter 3 with Adam and Eve. What happened with them? They refused to accept accountability. They passed the buck. They passed the blame. They did not take responsibility for what they did individually, but instead passed the blame on to somebody else. God is wanting people here, right, to be responsible because that's what he's entrusted with this, right? It's the image of God to be responsible in the world. That's a big piece of it. And so Judah now is stepping into that, I think. Maybe I make a little too much of it. I don't know. Let me see what Mom has to say here. Interesting aspect. I was thinking that this was yet another example of forgiving, which it is eventually, right? It is eventually, but it is not that simple. Joseph is playing games with his brother. He's thinking about giving all the grain that they could carry and paying them back for the grain. I didn't walk through all those details of that, but yeah. Can you imagine the brothers thought what they found the payment on top of their sack? Yeah, as we can see, when they go back, they're thinking, "Oh crap, we better." They apologize in advance when they eventually go back there. So I myself, Judas says, will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally accountable. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life. He's putting himself there on the line. As it is, if we had not delayed, we could have gone and returned twice. So he's stepping up, taking responsibility. He's also saying to his dad, look, Dad, I know you love little Benny, but this is what we have to do. This is the only good choice that there really is for this. So then their father Israel, verse 11, says this to them: if it must be, then do it. Put some of the best product in your bag. Take it down to the man as a gift. Perhaps the silver. Perhaps it was a mistake. So let me end there. Let me end with this. When Joseph first sees Benjamin, chapter 43, verse 29, as he looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, right? So there is more of a closeness there for a lot of reasons that I probably won't mention, right? But it's not hard to imagine. Deeply moved, verse 30, deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. Right? He sees Benjamin. He's so overwhelmed with emotion. Guys, check this out. In the Bible, Joseph, like, men are not afraid of emotion. Okay? Well, check this as we go with like David and stuff like that. Like this whole like masculine, unemotional thing is not really a biblical thing. Joseph is so overcome with emotion. Well, he does want to not show it. Of course, that would tip them off to why would he be emotional about these strangers? But he's so emotional that he goes and find a place to weep. He went to his private room and he wept there after he washed his face, and controlling himself, he said, serve the food. And when they served the food, Benjamin gets 5 times as much food. That's the end of the chapter. Tomorrow is the kind of climax of this section and the reconciliation. It's good stuff. But again, this stuff is in between there. And there's another little piece along the way that we'll see in the reading tomorrow. Feel free to share your thoughts, your questions, the things that jumped out to you, the things that are confusing to you, the things that you love. Any of those things, leave them in the comments, and we can interact later. I will see you tomorrow. Have a great night.